Spooktober? Scooby-Doo.
Hey! Yes, since it is Halloween, the elephant in the room is that I am in a Halloween costume, because Scooby-Doo is a dog, which equates to the generic Spirit Halloween furry costume, right? Sorry for the furry appropriation, but I am not putting myself on camera after last year, that's for sure, but there's also kind of no visuals for this video, and this is not a visual medium we are going into today, so there kinda needed to be something for you to look at for the people that are watching and not just listening. We had to make do with what we could work. So why are we here today? It's the month of Scooby-Tober, and I thought what could possibly be better to celebrate the occasion than discussing and analyzing the newest entry in the Scooby franchise, especially if it's talking about the Hex Girls. The fictional eco-goth band from Oak Haven originates from the 1999 film Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost, where Thorn, Luna, and Dusk cross paths with the gang during a mystery. If you're watching this, I have no doubt you've already seen the film at some point and know what happens. It turns out Thorn's father and the mayor were up to no good, unbeknownst to the band, leading a famous author from the town to bring back his witchy ancestor and nearly destroy everything. The band would return several more times, like in Legend of the Vampire, which I've discussed, and across several different TV series over the years since, becoming huge fan favorites for anyone that grew up with them. After 2022's Trick or Treat Scooby-Doo, we were supposed to get a film that was intended to be a sister film, made back-to-back in the same art style by the same team, titled Scooby-Doo and the Haunted High Rise, which would have been the band's first time in full starring roles alongside the gang. We even were supposed to see more of Oak Haven and things like that people had been wanting for so long. The entire film had all of the voice acting recorded, including the original Hex Girls returning as always, and they had even fully finished recording and finalizing all of the new songs for the film, ready to go into animation. But then Warner Brothers decided to cancel all Scooby-Doo direct-to-video films entirely, instead of at least one every year or so like we had been getting for so long. And so what would have likely been one of the best Scooby films we could have ever gotten was permanently lost to time, along with all of the voice acting and songs finished for it, scrapped, and for all we know, done away with. Fans have been mourning this loss for years now, waiting for the day we could see the band return. And though it's not in the form of another movie or a TV series, this year did finally see their return in official media in some capacity. The Hex Girls, A Rogue Thorn, written by Lily Meade, was published August 26, 2025 by Random House Publishing as a young adult novel, the first in what could potentially be an ongoing series about Scooby and friends, though Meade has not been contacted for a sequel specifically if that is in their current plans. This is an interesting step for the franchise, because even though young adult is typically like 12 to maybe 17, books for the franchise are typically aimed at babies and young elementary school kids. Fun if you try, but kind of a drag to interact with as an adult. Love or hate young adult fiction though, this is a clear step up in the target demographic when it comes to the franchise. Significantly more approachable for adult fans of the characters who want a little bit more meat on the bones of a Scooby story, which is where I find myself as I go into this book. Since I do tend to talk about most things Scooby here, and this is the only new piece of media for the franchise that we have gotten for a hot minute, and will probably remain as such, truly what better way is this special month spent than analyzing something a little different and switching things up. I'll go over the prologue and how things start for you, so you can decide if you want to go pick this up and analyze along with me if you haven't already finished the book by this point. And then I'll start breaking down the true meat, characters, references to all things Scooby that you could ever want. If you don't want spoilers, do not go past the prologue point, but also do go support and pick up the book. We are here to analyze and not take away from any sales. Also, the Patreon is now public. You can go support the channel there specifically if you want to do that. The book opens with a flash-forward prologue, telling us that Thorn is in love with Velma Dinkley, and that Velma is in trouble and needs Thorn to save her. I think this immediately is the first make or break that will sell someone on the book or turn them away. There are a lot of homophobic people in the Scooby fandom, a lot of them, that have not been happy the last many years, but Velma has a decent history of being queer at this point. I have an entire video about her queer evolution that you should go watch if you haven't, but this was meant to be part of her identity as far back as the 2001 film, and became reality with Mystery Incorporated, where the creative team wrote her as having a self-discovery journey, and realizing she was gay by the end of the show, ending up in a gay relationship eventually with a character who is voiced by her actress from the 2001 film ironically. That's all detailed in the video I mentioned. And of course we had her flirtation with Coco that was so joyfully explored in the film Trick or Treat. You had about the same reaction there, people upset with Velma being gay yet again, and people adoring that movie and it going viral, as it should for the amazing quality of that film. The queer evolution even continued with a more recent adult animated series that I dare not mention for my safety, but let's just say it's becoming more of the default. And there are a ton of people that do not like that, but there are also a lot of people, the queer fans of Scooby-Doo, hey, that love and embrace it, who often always saw her that way before it became part of the character's reality. As for Thorn, I think this will go over just about the same. I'm sure there are a lot of guys that had crushes on her that are straight and homophobic who will become upset about their goth baddie being a queer woman now in something. But I think this is balanced out, because if there's one thing the queer community loves, it's the Hex Girls. The eco-goth band inspiring so many young queer kids was kind of a given, as Rick Kopp, one of the writers of the Witch's Ghost film, grew up himself as a young gay kid who loved watching Hanna-Barbera's Josie and the Pussycats and became fascinated with the band of girls traveling around, and wanted to bring that to the table. Having co-written the Brady Bunch movie, he was no stranger to injecting camp and queer themes into media. But in this case, it was actually not intentional. You can read this article from The Independent for further interviews, but basically the band became icons for the community organically, which I think is really how the most important icons develop. And so I really think it's no surprise to see Thorn being explored as queer herself. I think a beautiful young woman in an eco-goth band seems more likely to be queer than not, really. The book also tells us that it will be delving into the further origins that we know of for the band during this prologue, and letting us know that they've left their hometown of Oak Haven, where the original film took place, to make their way to Coolsville where the gang live, as well as using Thorn's relationship with magic and witchcraft. So again, if you're gonna like this book, love it, or hate it, the 2-page prologue is already telling you everything you need to know, really. That, and if you just like reading young adult fiction, or know that that isn't your cup of tea, which obviously is fair. I've been reading a lot of it though. I love me some of the Raven Cycle and sequel Dreamer trilogy. I even have the first of the graphic novel adaptation, and I read through the entirety of the Hunger Games books this year, among other things, so I've done my homework for this. I'm going to get into spoilers and talking about what happens in the book now though, breaking all of that down and my thoughts on it as we go, so if you don't want to know the rest and read it yourself, maybe come back after that part later when you're done reading the book yourself. Alright, we are in spoiler territory to have fun now. Let's go! If it wasn't obvious from the prologue, our point of view character in the book is Sally McKnight, aka Thorn. We find she and her father from the film moving into their new home in Coolsville, and her being disgusted at the color of the room, which is pink. It's at least the only bedroom with a bathroom, the biggest bedroom in general, and he promises to let her paint it when he catches up on moving expenses, having already sold his drugstore and the house to move here. Thorn is torn on all of this, knowing she asked for the fresh start, but also why they had to leave it all. What he did for the sake of money in the original film has completely devastated her relationship with him, and even getting away from there doesn't magically fix everything, and it doesn't help that the band looked guilty by association with how well their aesthetic matched the con her dad and the mayor pulled. As she looks through her things and finds a photo from that performance, we find that she only kept it because it was the photographer, Velma Dinkley, who gave it to her. It all especially stings because the gang exposed so many painful truths at the end of the movie, and it seems like the damage to the town and band is irreversible. But also, it was Velma who convinced her with the spreadsheet to move here to California, where the band could have even better opportunities and an easier time blending in. It seems the two girls have actually been video calling each other frequently, Velma promising just how ghost-free and quiet it will be. It didn't start that way though, as Thorn had only accepted Velma's follow request to see if they did anything other than ruin the lives of people like her, bitter that all of her neighbors had turned on she and her father. So we're almost getting an enemies to lovers kind of thing here. But Velma broke through the cold and proved they hadn't meant for this, which made staying at home all the more unbearable. Dusk and Luna finally make it over, lamenting about their own new places, before seeing the horror of pink inflicted upon Thorn. Her band sisters help her unpack, pulling out a shirt that says, "So goth, I was born black." This is the other thing that will probably upset the same people that would hate the book for being queer. I know that especially after last year. My comments are permanently off for even talking about another recent Scooby title that switched races of characters and invited a lot of lovely racism. Historically, Luna of the Hex Girls is canonically black from the very start. This is even written on the character designs that you can see here, and other behind-the-scenes material for Witch's Ghost. Even though Legend of the Vampire and What's New whitewashed her as we discussed in the video on that movie, she was always meant to be black, and all subsequent appearances have made sure to fix that back. Thorn and Dusk, however, were canonically very pale white before this book, so yes, both have actually been race-swapped in this case. It's just not that serious to me. But given that I was called a bad person and told to not be alive any longer for even talking about a certain recent Scooby title that did the same thing, I know pretty definitively that if people weren't homophobic and turning away from this book already, that'll do it. Not much we can do about that. The shirt smells so much like home that the nostalgia nearly brings Thorn to tears, rare as that already is for her, and she's reminded how grateful she is that her band sisters moved here with her when they didn't didn't have to, could have gone on with their lives and still chose to stand by her wherever she decided to go. They find her box of Wicca-related items, but she tells them she doesn't need it and to just put it away for now. Dusk still isn't completely sold on the place, but Thorn assures the two that they'll love the gang when they get to know them, and they will have a totally fresh start where nobody knows what happened. But Luna is clearly concerned and tells her she can't run from her past forever. The next day, Thorn starts her time at Coolsville High School and meets her teacher, Miss Bergman, who actually calls her by her preferred name. I don't know this for sure, but it seems like Miss Bergman is likely named after Mary Kay Bergman. Bergman was the voice of Daphne during this iconic era of Scooby, starting with Zombie Island and continuing with Witch's Ghost, making her the specific Daphne that the band met the first time. Tragically, Bergman took her own life in 1999 ahead of the release of her final film for the series, Alien Invaders, leaving behind a very special legacy. So I do find it hard to believe this isn't an intentional choice to name a character after her in tribute. Miss Bergman forces Thorn through the usual introduction, and insists she finds someone in the class to show her around as she gets settled. Thorn even more horrified when she sees a hand go up to volunteer, until she realizes that it belongs to Daphne Blake, from the gang and close friend of Velma. Daphne saved her the seat next to her and said they were looking for her earlier, and Velma was worried since she hasn't been responding to texts. Thorn makes excuses like being busy with the move and having to get a new phone, not mentioning the mini drafts she had actually prepared to send Velma, someone she has growing feelings for who probably doesn't share them. Feelings that started to grow with more time she spent getting to know the smartest member of the meddling kids that ruined her life, until she was missing band practice for her and planning their next calls, only her band sisters knowing the truth. Daphne gets her a group chat started with the gang, and then asks when they are going to get her a new warm weather wardrobe, loving a challenge. On her way to her next class meant to be with Fred, Thorn sees a boy bump into a statue of a pioneer-looking couple, splitting his backpack open with all of the contents. Nobody else goes to help, so she tries to gather his papers, but he rudely tells her that he's fine and to leave him alone. The statue already broken from the incident, when he spills his bag open again, he kicks it some more and gets angry that Thorn is still there. Before they can say anything else, she sees a small metallic cloud coming from the bits of statue that fell to the ground, supernaturally different from the statue it fell from, when the statue suddenly falls, and all of the discoloration is gone beyond some gold dust on the boy's backpack. But Thorn can't help but wonder if her anger caused the statue to fall, and that magic is going to destroy her life again. When she makes it to class, she also finds Luna there already talking with Fred, and she says they definitely have to audition for the talent show where Los Angeles talent scouts regularly have been coming. Thorn comments on Fred's ascot, which gets him into a text war with Daphne over fashion, explaining he keeps it as an ode to the founders of the town who wore ascots around their necks to battle dust and sweat while working. Thorn jokes that she didn't want to cause a rift in he and Daphne's relationship, but he quickly gets nervous and says there's nothing between them. They're just friends, which, sure. Thorn has Shaggy in her 6th class, and gets a surprise when Scooby pops up outside the window, upsetting the teacher. I think the most insane part of the book so far is when Shaggy says leaving Scoob in the van would be inhumane. The teacher says the dog is not human, so Shaggy says the characters in the book assignment aren't either, and those lives are still important to the teacher, which ends with him asking Shaggy not to compare his dog to Animal Farm. Absolutely diabolical. As the final class begins, it's finally the class with Velma, which still manages to fluster Thorn even knowing it's coming. Velma traded seats so that they could be lab partners, hoping to help her with the subject. And between both being completely unable to get anything out, Thorn thanks her for everything she's done and apologizes for not reaching out and worrying her. Velma ends up embarrassed and says she wasn't worried while she blushes, saying her friends exaggerate. Needless to say, their first hour in person together since they first met goes just as well as all their video calls. Velma takes her around to see things like the auditorium, but also more specifically a fairly gothic-looking garden area run by students. Thorn feeling some of the most relief she's had, realizing she won't have to give up this particular hobby after all. Being eco-goths, the band is very mindful about nature in everything they do, even reusing and thrifting clothing, and she would often use herbs in her Wicca practices before. They make their way into the theater, where they find the rest of the gang and Luna, who already signed them up. She also confirms that Daphne color-coded her schedule like she did for Thorn, which prompts Velma to ask if Daph is stealing all her moves now, and Daph, also being diabolical, says she's not going to steal everything, embarrassing Velma while sticking her tongue out to rub it in. With the rest of the band being added to the group chat, Daphne apologizes for not hanging out until this, noting that they aren't allowed on any more unchaperoned road trips out of state until they turn 18. Fred points out they only almost died twice, which should have counted for something. This, of course, all retcons things so that the gang is still 17 or younger, and in high school, even though they clearly are adults by the time of Witch's Ghost's continuity. But the franchise isn't exactly very strict with continuity. You could say the same about most appearances of the band since then. Dusk pops in more sure of this move being a bad idea, as the only one who doesn't share a class with anybody. She did at least get to know Jordan, the lead vocalist of the first act auditioning today, which is another girl band. Once it's finally their turn, all three girls feel like everything is exactly as it should be as the music runs through them and seems to reach the audience. Thorn feels euphoric as she stops by the garden to sign up for a shift, surprising the volunteers already there with how much she actually does know and care about nature, despite how she might look at first glance. When she gets home, she finds her dad took off early to greet her and is happy to hear about the talent show. show, but things still feel broken between the two of them. After all, being here at all is a reminder of what he did. The next day, the judgy gardener girl is getting along with her a lot better, hoping to maybe get to know them and feel less alien. As the girls were waiting on the callback list earlier today, the aura around Jordan seemed to be intimidating everyone else, some of the students wondering if they would even take 2 bands this year. Jordan even makes a snide comment about talent scouts coming, so they should only take the best of the best. Luna has to stop the other two from initiating a fight that Jordan seems to want, talking down to them as she says it's cool they auditioned on their first day, and insults the lyrics of their song. Thorn makes it back to current reality and tells her garden friend Mary Allen that the band made the callbacks for the talent show and are returning tomorrow for the final chance to make the lineup. Mary Allen even apologizes for judging how she looked initially, but Thorn says she likes to subvert expectations, resulting in the other girl, Kaylee, to ask if that's why she hangs out with them, leaving her to wonder who that was about. She finally asks if the girl meant her band, more upset about her best friends being insulted than she was about herself before, but it turns out they actually meant the gang, which surprises Thorn because they seem like your quintessential Americana. Not at all controversial. Both girls say it's not in the gang's nature to be helpful, more so meddlesome. Mary Allen saying she must not know the truth about them being dangerous. They single Fred out for using connections to get out of trouble he started and being banned from multiple stores for the various traps he's made, then go after Daphne for being rich and probably how they get out of trouble. We then get what I believe to be a Zombie Island Witches Ghost reference as they mention her misusing her anchor seat in broadcasting class to Snoop, getting sent home early from her journalism internship last summer after an incident at a private island and small town down south, or maybe north. So, that's how we are retconning the clearly adult actions of those movies into being teenage antics now, which isn't really too different from Return to Zombie Island. The girls believe it wouldn't have been fair to not tell Thorn about the gang's true nature, but it really only turns her off from the two of them instead. They don't have too much terrible to say about Shaggy, and only praise for Velma, especially with how smart she is, but then imply that if she's so smart and still hangs out with them, there must be something wrong with her as well. The band is at least enjoying the size of the pink dungeon at this point, though Thorn continues to remain distracted and checking for notifications, which they tease her about. When considering songs to perform, she has to admit to the others that she hasn't written any new songs since they left. Luna wonders if it's related to her relationship with Wicca, but Thorn plays it off as just stress. But even she realizes her writer's block feels like a wall not unlike the one she's built around magic, and the anxiety has the other two counting every time she pulls out her phone to check her notifications. She finally confesses that she's waiting for a message from a reporter, as Daphne said the local paper was interested in doing a feature on them. Dusk is extremely excited, but Luna is a little disappointed it's not who she thought it would be, hoping a little love would inspire her to write. At the callbacks the next day, Dusk and Luna agree they both wish they had the special tea Thorn used to make, making her feel worse about abandoning magic, even for herbal tea that mainly warmed up their vocal cords, but she dares not risk it. It seems Daphne getting them featured in the paper this morning worked enough to annoy Jordan, who begins taunting the entire band today. Thorn just wants any conflict that makes things feel like everything is falling apart to go away, having even switched her shift times in the garden to avoid those girls. Even worse that she realizes if people as nice as the gang could be misunderstood, what would happen if people found out about her own past? They go on to perform, with the gang and the rest of the audience singing along, and when the judges call them out, we actually get the full names of Dusk and Luna, which are also clearly more shoutouts to all 3 Hex Girls voice actors. Thorn is voiced by Jennifer Hale, Luna is voiced by Kimberly Brooks, and Dusk is voiced by Jane Weedlin, actual member of the band The Go-Go's.
I had a crush on Shaggy.
Like that's my kind of girl. Jane Weedlin of the Go-Go's is one of the Hex Girls.
I'm a Hex Girl, and I'm gonna put a spell on you.
Here, the book gives Luna and Dusk the full names Kimberly Hale and Jane Brooks. Luna's name, Kimberly Hale, comes from the first name of her voice actor, and the last name of Thorn's voice actor, while Dusk's name, Jane Brooks, comes from her voice actress's first name and Luna's voice actress's last name. Of course, the judges tell them that they made it, as if there was ever any doubt, but their huge excitement is quieted by a banging sound that seems to be coming from outside the building, and Shaggy proclaiming Scooby's out there is enough to send the gang running. The band share a look and run after them, finding the gardeners on shift today cowering in fear, with everything being a mess compared to this morning, and Scooby pushing against Shaggy's legs to leave desperately. Finally, Thorn realizes the fog approaching them is moving like it has a mind of its own, a toxic neon green color to it as she starts to make out what seems to be a face. It greets the Hex Girls directly with a deep voice, addressing itself as their humble host, and says it's looking forward to all they'll do together and hopes they like its welcome present. The mist dives toward them, and just like that, disappears. Fred helps Kaylee up, who pointedly looks at Thorn, who herself realizes the entire garden is covered in a green residue, every plant it touched mutating, and the entire fresh harvest rotting, everything destroyed in moments. In the wake of the garden destruction, all the students around Thorn seem to blame her for what's happened, and painfully, despite the creature addressing the 3 of them, her 2 best friends have inched away from her just enough that she can tell. She also catches a glimpse of the mystery machine heading out, Velma shaking something off her fingers, handing Daphne a beaker, and taking Shaggy's hand to get inside. As parents come and everyone is slowly cleared out, Dusk and Luna are interrogated together, glancing at Thorn with guilt as they give their story of events. And she feels they should. She's the one who worked in the garden, associated with magic, not them. And she believes the older of the officers doing interrogation agrees, having the younger stay behind to interrogate her alone, and identifying himself as Sheriff Jones. His tone clearly implies he believes she did this, telling her to keep her attention on him as she looks to her friends. She explains as much, saying she followed them and her other friends, and when asked who the others were, explains one is Fred Jones, presuming he might be his nephew, given the shared last name. His defeated reaction suggests that he's his father, however. She tries to describe the monster, but he has to stop her and say those don't exist, and seems suspicious that she signed up last minute for the gardening shift. She explains she signed up the first day of school as a new student, but he says her actions and choices since she's arrived answer everything that happened today, being a mean-spirited prank. She clearly wanted to disrupt everything and make a memorable entrance for herself as the new girl in town and get a bigger audience for her band. The destruction clearly shows it was meant to be a lasting reminder, and she doesn't know anyone here enough for someone to frame her. She points out she does know his son and the gang though, quite well now, hoping it will deter him. She even points out that there are witnesses that know Fred was here, and politely asks if she should slow down when he stops writing. He says the evidence doesn't point to Fred, and she says it doesn't point to her either. She and her father can come to the station, but he denies it and tells her to stay out of trouble. By the next day, students are calling the mist creature the Harvest Host, which has entirely ruined her reputation at the school. Luna tries to get her to eat, but when she doesn't, Shaggy happily takes it and adds it to his own meal, the gang having pushed a second table together to eat with them, like they always have, not having changed how they see them, maybe even endearing the girls to them further. Fred seems to be writing something on a notepad that looks like his father's from yesterday, which she tried asking about, like his dad's aggressive eagerness to blame teen mischief, which visibly upsets him. He and Velma promise to prove her innocence, but it just makes her feel even more guilty that even they seem to believe this is centered around her alone. Discussing their next steps, Velma says she gathered soil from the garden for an experiment, Thorn realizing that must have been the beaker she handed to Daphne yesterday. She promises that there has to be a rational explanation for this. Across the room, however, someone asks if it's going to show up again, and Jordan says she wouldn't be the person to ask. A crowd gathering around her as she says the Harvest Host didn't name her. Thorn feels guilty her friends have to be associated with this, so despite Luna trying to stop her, she walks over and points out that Jordan wasn't named because she wasn't there. She left before it arrived. Right before. She says the police were looking at this as a prank, and Jordan seems to be the only name cruel enough she can think of, which prompts Jordan to throw out a different name, Sally. She even points out that Thorn is the only one going by her stage name, Luna and Dusk still being called Kimberly and Jane during roll call, so she decided to look Thorn up, telling the audience around them to look up Sally McKnight. Everyone around says she's an evil witch. She burned half the town, has destroyed things before, performed magic with another witch. Voices coming from everywhere as they share what they find. Jordan then adds that she heard Thorn was eager to make work in the garden, there before the host showed up. More voices around read their phones to say the whole town was set on fire. Something about her father, and of course she knows the Mystery Incorporated gang and they invited them. As Thorn hides in the library, she finds the local history section far bigger than anything from Oakhaven, like it exists to stroke the ego of Coolsville as a whole. A print of the town charter, chipped remnants of fake gold nuggets above books about the old mines, and a portrait of what seems to be the town founders in pioneer clothing, the ones in the statue. The man, sitting on a large rock, has eyes that make his age indistinguishable, while the woman next to him seems to have taken any of his happiness for herself. The plaque reads, "The time for fear is over. Serenity is the only solution for Coolsville. Levi and Laura Coolidge, 1849. Velma gives her a jump scare to say they would have hated her, Thorn realizing this is a likely place to have found her. The Coolidges were about everything staying the same, while according to Velma, the band is the most interesting thing to happen here in a while, that and the Spectre. While lamenting that everyone knows, Thorn can't help but notice how feminine Velma is, all of the little things about her that she likes, staring into her eyes while holding hands, knowing she's falling for a girl that's only helping her out of kindness and would probably never feel the same. Girl, she's holding your hand, open your eyes! Velma says they're going to fix this, and brings out a beginner's history to Wicca book that she picked out for her, which she asks her to put back. While wanting nothing to do with it now, she had wanted to know so much more about her magic in the initial aftermath, knowing it had been fragments of traditions her dad remembered from her late mother, something she had confided in Velma with at the time. Thorn, however, eventually concedes, taking the book as Velma went out of her way to buy it at an occult store outside of town just for her. On their way out, Velma laughs to herself, pointing out Thorn saw the weird Coolidge quote and still assumed the school library would carry witchcraft books. As the days go by, Thorn realizes the neighborhood watch groups are spreading stories with how her dad has stopped talking about how his day went, despite it being the only conversation starter, though she feels that his past deserves judgment, while she herself gets disapproving looks from adults, spreading gossip just like they're children about her. Even at the nursery when trying to find a sibling for her Venus flytrap, the shopkeeper won't stop glaring at her incessantly, even with some salesmen from the Green Grove Company pitching their technology for making gardening totally techno and easier with their app, or even automated watering drones. Thorn and her two band sisters decide to leave the glaring shopkeeper behind, ready to meet the gang for apple picking anyway, as invited by Daphne. The other two actually don't seem as enthusiastic about it, however, and she starts to worry that her two friend groups aren't meshing. Dusk does admit she likes the dog, though, and Luna finds some things to say she's liking about them, having a shared interest with Fred. Dusk also has to admit Daphne got her an actually good selection at the thrift shop for new clothes. At the actual apple orchard, Thorn realizes Fred is gathering things that seem like they could be used for a trap, asking if they think the harvest host is going to show up. Velma denying it as Fred says maybe. They do try to assure her that it's only a precaution and that they didn't invite her just for that. We also have a fun moment of Luna laughing while Fred tries to explain his plans to catch a monster made of mist. Daphne also confirms Jordan as her prime suspect, as not many people seem to dislike Thorn, Velma trying to assure her that this still might have nothing to do with her beyond being a scapegoat. Regardless, the gang genuinely believes she had nothing to do with this. I love the little tug-of-war match that Luna and Fred get into after that, with Daphne as the referee. It feels good to have the gang actually participating in things more, as they largely have been absent beyond Velma more often than not by this point, although Scooby disappointingly remains an afterthought. Thorn steps away to pick apples, Velma following to try and assure her this definitely was not them being used as bait, and there are a ton of places the host could show up. But we also get a quiet moment of Velma realizing how good Thorn actually is at picking apples, Thorn explaining this was a frequent activity back home and her love of taking care of nature, and Velma quietly admits she invited them here because she thought Thorn would like it, and the two girls laugh and chase each other around, followed by some really sweet and genuine moments. A lot of lesbian imagery here. Thorn then remembers Velma saying the founders would hate her and asks for clarity, being told it's not just how she looks, but her arrival at all. The current leaders of the town following the same lead. A quiet town with no mysteries, no new people, nothing out of the ordinary. Even Daphne's childhood bake sale was shut down because only the PTA does that. Lost in thought, Thorn realizes there's a rancid smell and looks to her basket of apples to realize they've aged several weeks and gone brown. Rising from the grass, she sees the mist starting to form and grabs Velma to head back, as laughter surrounds them everywhere. Screams of strangers looking for their families take over as she sees the others running while carrying Fred's trap, but the two girls trip and fall, Velma losing her glasses. As they find them and get up, the mist starts addressing Thorn as its little witch, asking if her friends abandoned her like she abandoned Oakhaven, and that it did all this for her. The host has undeniably picked her as the sole target, even worse now with such a bigger audience. They find Daphne, who reports everyone is fine, though Fred is disappointed the trap wasn't ready. Thorn says someone has to call the cops, which Daphne agrees with but looks at Velma as she says Fred is calling his dad. Velma says she needs to go home, but Thorn refuses, so she tries to say Fred will explain, but the Hex Girls can't be here without it looking suspicious that they were at both crime scenes. Shaggy pops in saying he doesn't normally drive, but he's ready to take the girls home with Scooby while the trio stay behind. Arriving home late, Thorn is both relieved and worried when the door is unlocked, her dad calling out with relief. She rushes past to ignore him, leading him to angrily ask where she's been. She says the bare minimum, and she knows he's aware he's not one to talk about keeping secrets, not pushing further. When she wakes up, she finds two police officers waiting and clearly aware that the host mentioned her last night. Her dad has lied about her getting home from the orchard for dinner early to give her an alibi, explaining he doesn't want her out late in an unfamiliar town. Unfortunately, this means nothing to the cops as they show an article about the witch's ghost incident. They implicate Thorn as a witch involved with her father's activity, which she immediately denies, her father's face somewhat falling from her tone. She corrects that she hasn't done Wicca since they moved, but the cops say that and witchcraft are the same scam, and they heard her mom did the same bullshit before they got married. It's enough to finally give her dad a backbone, and the cops a pause, as he stands behind his daughter telling them they're no longer welcome to talk to his underage daughter without a lawyer, slamming the door on them. Her father's solidarity is spoiled, however, at the reminder of what he did, and her mother's name being dragged into it now. More importantly, her mother practiced before she was even born, and died so long ago that it wasn't even common knowledge back home. So how would the cops know all that? Only she, the gang, and the band know, so she calls for a group video chat, asking for confirmation the other girls didn't say anything. Both are sleepy and confused, asking her to explain so they can help, but she says that's the problem, that she can't trust one of them, and she feels like she knows who it is. Dusk takes offense, so Thorn explains the cops were here and knew about her mom, which shouldn't be possible, and Luna agrees with that. So suddenly Thorn feels Dusk's weird behavior and slowly becoming a stranger since moving makes sense. Dusk finally confesses, saying she didn't mean for Jordan to use it against her. Thorn points out the girl's first words to her were literally an insult. Dusk trying to say Jordan isn't like that with everyone else, and is nice to her in class, listening to how much it sucked to not share classes with them, and felt like she didn't have anyone else. All Thorn can say is, you had me, but Dusk says she didn't. While Thorn had everyone. She always has everyone. They came here for her and she already has friends. They came here so they didn't have to split up and she doesn't even care. Luna tries to stop her but she rejects it, saying she knows what she's talking about as well, and that she's tired of ruining her life over and over for someone that only cares about herself, and that she's done, ending the call on her end. Thorn says she does care about both of them, and Luna says she knows, but she has to go be with Dusk. Before there can be any objection, she points out Thorn has other new friends. Dusk doesn't have anyone except for her. She says she's still here and she loves her, and Thorn lies and says she'll be fine as they hang up. 3 days later, Thorn finds herself with the gang in the Mystery Machine, visiting Crystal Cove for a supply sourcing expedition. I feel like this is the best of both worlds scenario, as Coolsville was finally determined as the official home of the gang during the 80s for everything up until Mystery Incorporated, and then that show introduced Crystal Cove as the hometown. Whenever new titles pop up using that instead of Coolsville, it always feels out of place because it was so specific to that series, it just doesn't make sense in any other context. So having both of them coexist as locations feels like a safer workaround here. Everyone is set to split up, with Thorn and Velma going back to the occult bookstore to find a potential magical stop for the ghost, while the others look for physical supplies for Fred's next trap. But being around the gang and seeing how close they are just reminds her of the rift between she and her best friends. In the bookstore, she meets the nice old woman who runs the place where Velma seems to be a regular. Thorn feels conflicted as she looks around, seeing everything that she came here to avoid. She asks Velma why they're here, who understands the real meaning, explaining the gang come to Crystal Cove for supplies and access to records Coolsville doesn't have or refuses to share, this being the destination for anything too unsightly for back home, and where she and the gang will probably end up eventually. Velma says she loves her town, but she doesn't think it loves people like her, which Thorn can relate to right now. Checking out, Thorn sees a book titled Crystal and Gold, the story of two towns and manifest destiny, with older photos of Coolsville and Crystal Cove divided by a gold line. She's distracted by the flowery scent of Velma's shampoo, as the shop owner says the book isn't really a cult, but it's a new book about their history written by a local author, so Velma picks it up. Thorn says she hopes it's for herself, already buying her a book as it is, and Velma says it's cute she thinks she would stop at one, short-circuiting Thorn's brain, recognizing the gay panic she's going through as Fred bursts in. With that, Velma immediately lets go of Thorn's hand in a panic, the shop owner not rushing them, leading Thorn to realize Velma must not have wanted Fred to see it for some reason, such as maybe she didn't mean it as purely platonic. Fred angrily yells that he can't believe he did this, referring to his father, as Daphne and the others follow behind. It turns out the shops won't sell to them anymore, his father commanding they stop supplying his son with tools of vandalism and destruction, so it was put. Sadly for Shaggy, even the diner refused service, which makes Scooby whine. The bookshop owner, however, doesn't bother acknowledging such a thing, and says no one bans her from selling books, seeing them off. At the rehearsal for the talent show, Thorn goes to check on Dusk, reminding herself she's addressing a stranger instead of her best friend. But all her plans fall to pieces when she walks in on Jordan discussing music with Dusk, who then walks right into Thorn. And even with Thorn trying to show blatant evidence of her being nasty to her, Dusk still makes excuses and says she could have warned her since she saw her coming. The pain of seeing someone like a sister who's hurt you but won't admit it still being friends with Jordan anyway, knowing she hates her, cuts deep. When it's time to go on, Thorn doesn't hear her name, and Jordan makes a nasty jab about calling her Sally instead, making her almost miss her cue. And as she misses another and tries to apologize, a stage light suddenly falls and almost crushes her, someone behind her yanking her back. Dusk jumped from her drums, breaking one of her lucky drumsticks to save her. With rehearsal scheduled to a later date, she can't see an obvious fault looking up where the light was, just a smudge of gold she thinks might be rust, but the smirk on Jordan's face tells her enough. Later, Velma tells Thorn about their next plan first, knowing she won't like it. Daphne unlocks the school building with her key from her journalism teacher, Thorn realizing how much they must have done stuff like this to have it down. And as Fred has them split up, I say this in good faith, I can't tell if Velms here is her nickname, which Fred did use before like in Monsters Unleashed.
What's up, Velms?
Or if it's a typo, but cute reference if it's intentional, which I assume. Thorn follows Velma as she gathers beakers and solutions, putting a hand on Thorn's waist while digging into her bag, pulling out several samples of soil, like the one from the community garden's first attack. Velma believes they will stop whatever this monster is soon, and that Fred's plan is possible this time. Thorn confesses her fears, enough that Velma realizes she wants her to say this won't actually be paranormal. Thorn admits she likes life better without the supernatural, but Velma quietly says that ignoring what's uncomfortable is not the same thing as staying safe. but she is hopeful they'll find answers. As Thorn walks into the hallway to clear her head, she realizes it suddenly is cold, the lights starting to flicker, and as a shadow appears in the distance, a voice seemingly calls out saying that she doesn't belong here and is ruining the town. Thorn tries to recite the vanishing chant Velma helped her choose from the Wiccan book, but the figure remains. She then notices an ascot around the neck, realizing it must be Fred, but a noise behind her makes her spin around, and she gets another scare as a hand touches her shoulder. It does seem to actually be Fred, who doesn't seem to know what was going on otherwise, such as the lights or cold, so they both get the others and go before the janitor shows up. The next night, Thorn sits in the pumpkin patch with Scooby to guard her, and 19 chapters in, we finally actually get really anything to do with him. Thorn is anxious about how certain Fred and Velma are that the host will show up, specifically because of just how packed the pumpkin patch is, and she also has anxiety about losing her best friends forever, as much as she likes the gang. Shaggy walks over with some pumpkins, and Thorn gives him permission to snack, feeling it's better if the host shows up for her to be alone anyway, so nobody else has to get hurt or blamed. She's to remain here as bait, while the trio work a makeshift face painting booth with a canopy meant to launch and ensnare the host if it's a physical being. If it's not, she's responsible for Plan B herself, meant to use the banishing spell she tried the night before. As expected, the mist starts to spread across the pumpkin patch, the trio watching from the booth as the boys return from their snacking. Not wanting people to get sick like the orchard attack, Thorn rushes over to someone and tries to get them to leave, the boys joining the crusade while the rest of the gang leave their trap to help as well. But of course, the voice of the host rings out anyway, so she asks it to leave her alone as she covertly maneuvers toward the trap, but it says it's here for her, because of her. She says she's not even from here though, and it says that's the point. She doesn't belong here and should go home, repent for what she did to the Ravencrofts. As the host closes in, Fred yells out and the trap flies into motion, leading the host to go after the gang instead while the tarp just goes through it. That means it's up to Thorn, who tries to read the note and banish it, but he just laughs and says they are one and the same, disappearing again. Velma and the others call out for her, Fred apologizing as they find them and Daphne rushing into a hug. The others hope to try again and not give up, but Velma walks off and starts cleaning up the trap, so Thorn follows her. Clearly beating herself up, Velma says Thorn could have gotten hurt and is sorry they put her in that position. Thorn, trying to speak more scientific to her, doesn't seem to cheer her up, though. She hates that she was put in danger. It's different when it's Thorn instead of the gang or herself, and she tries to conceal that she's started to cry. Thorn is terrified as she brings herself to ask what's different about her, and as Velma looks at her with her tearful eyes, it seems like something has clicked in her mind as she gets up, Thorn leaning forward until their lips almost touch. They stumble into the post behind them and start kissing and holding each other for a while until she steps on a rotted branch, and Velma instinctively looks around in a panic. Thorn assures her nobody saw it, but asks if it would be so bad if they did, knowing the gang wouldn't be weird about it. All Velma can really get out is that she stands out enough as it is. They all do. Thorn's internal monologue here also confirms that this version of her came out as a lesbian, and strictly a lesbian, in 6th grade, and it wasn't that scary when she already got judged for how she looked anyway. But she does understand how Velma feels, because she came here to avoid eyes that judged her like that, while only doing the opposite since she arrived. So she promises she won't tell anyone without Velma's consent, allowing her to relax into a hug. She tells Thorn she's wanted to kiss her like that for so long, imagined how to do it and the ways it could happen so many times, and that believing the host got her made her realize she couldn't wait any longer. Thorn reminds Velma she's been in danger with her before, but Velma says that was before she knew her, before it was possible she could keep her, and Thorn says she'd like it if she kept her. So, all the mushy young adult romance stuff anybody might have been waiting for is officially here. The host gets 2 more locations in the following days, and despite not being there, Thorn's reputation only gets worse. Eating lunch with Velma, it seems this thing has hit enough locations to isolate a pattern, always in the late afternoon to early evening, also allowing them to isolate 2 more potential locations it could target. Velma gives Thorn a little bag of gummy bears that she says she triple-checked were vegan, which goes appreciated. They also laugh as she confirms to Velma that she's actually reading the Crystal and Gold book, which gives her something different to focus on. She reaches a passage about Levi and Laura Coolidge's journey to what would become Coolsville, going over some of the various tragedies that occurred on the way. Levi losing his family and latching onto Laura Ruby, a fellow separated migrant who wasn't scared by the superstitions spoken about his supposedly doomed train, leading them to found the town with the surviving members, and swearing nothing would ever haunt the town. She shares this with Velma, who notices it doesn't say what happened to Laura Ruby's original wagon train. From what she knows, the train was even worse off than the Coolidge one, one of the only people to make it before merging, the book making it sound like a mutual decision to team up where it was more like her train had no other choice, being avoided just like Levi's group. Thorn finds herself empathizing with the Coolidges the more she reads, knowing their pain of trying to move on from the past. Finishing lunch, Thorn worries about being able to perform the spell correctly when they go to the next location, a museum, to try and save people, magic only reminding her of the fear from when she fought against Sarah Ravencroft. Velma says anything can be distorted for evil, but it was her who saved everyone. However, Thorn finally voices her fear that their evil followed her here. Either way, Velma promises to prove her innocence. A scream suddenly echoes across campus, however, and as they rush toward what sounds like agony, they find it coming from the area of the first attack, the student garden. Thorn realizing this isn't another attack by the host. Someone says it's her fault. She was trying to warn them about her, and then she sees what they're talking about. The words, "She destroyed one town," are written on the greenhouse roof, although it's not quite finished at the end, because Jordan, who clearly did it, didn't finish. Her dead body, instead, is impaled through the stomach by sharp metal points, paint on her hands glowing gold, her lifeless eyes locked on Thorn and accusing her even in death. Voices start to echo as they call Thorn a witch, even as Velma tries to say that Jordan must have slipped. The police arrive, and for once do their best to defend her to all of her crying classmates, not allowing an accusation as serious as murder gain traction when it's clearly not true. As much as the truth spreads, she still feels that Jordan died because she came here, dying warning everyone that she's dangerous, and wasn't even wrong about it, because nothing bad ever happened before she came. Velma apprehensively comes to sit with her, but Thorn understands being afraid to be seen together now, and pulls her hand out of hers this time and walks off. Before Velma can say anything, Dusk walks in, and Thorn can tell she already knows by the tears on her face, but she doesn't know how to apologize without making things worse, or what she'll do if Dusk blames her. She walks up to Thorn and says through tears that she begged her to lay off her, but she got more mad after their fight caused them to stop speaking, saying it looks bad, but she promised that she wasn't evil and didn't deserve this. But as much as Thorn wants to say she understands, all she can do is vomit. With that chapter, I have to say I'm actually shocked. I did not see that coming, way more graphic than I was thinking this book would be. The next day, as Thorn and the gang pull into the museum parking lot, Fred does a U-turn immediately, saying that his dad is there. Velma figures the amount of cops here must be because of Jordan now that they've also figured out the same pattern, as the reporters apparently used her death to spread paranoia about the host, despite it being ruled an accident. As Fred is visibly stressed out, we also get confirmation that his dad is Fred Jones Sr. here, like in Mystery Incorporated, which does make me wonder why he's the sheriff rather than the mayor in this story given all the references to the show anyway. We do get a really sweet moment of the rest of the gang reassuring him though, the kind of thing I've been really missing during this book. They sneak into the museum from the back, Fred immediately noticing that the police aren't looking to the sky for the host, but to the parking lot they almost came in at, looking for Thorn. Daphne reassures Fred, however, and gets everyone ready to continue with the plan. They split up to look less suspicious, boys to the west end and girls to the east, and Thorn notices an exhibit honoring the Coolidges with a plaque noting that Daphne's family donated it. She gets embarrassed and runs off, and Thorn wonders if being a Nepo baby is why she's so understanding of her, and why her bond with Fred is so strong, both wanting to avoid being like their parents. She then finds Velma and asks her about her own parents, who she implies are proud of her, but think this is all temporary, quoting her abuela with an accent, implying Velma is not fully white, probably in this continuity. Specifically, her grandmother worries about her finding a man, which Thorn asks if that's what she wants, which eventually gets the reply that she knows what she wants. With it almost being closing time, the gang decide to leave, but the back entrance is already closed, and they now have to go through the front where all the cops are. As a flash of gold light catches Thorn's eye, Sheriff Jones grabs her arm tightly, taking her to the garden. Of course, he asks why she keeps being found at every sighting of the host, though she points out she wasn't at either of the last two locations and has an alibi directly from his son, and he gets in her face to say she'd already be in a jail cell if he could prove her alibi false, but that would make his son an accessory, clearly getting very angry that his son is associated with the scandal because of her, and having to explain to his superior why his child is a constant witness in this case. He then insults her mother's side of the family, calling it the Ravencroft bloodline specifically, which confuses her since that's not true. Sheriff Jones has one of the cops pull out the file, showing a printout from a fan site of Ben Ravencroft, showing a photo of he and his sibling when they were younger, who clearly is her mother. Fred calls out at his father, telling him to leave her alone, which just pisses him off. It does get his attention, leaving Thorn to go be upset at his son, Fred's eyes remaining on her as she realizes this is a diversion. She's sure the van is waiting for her somewhere nearby, but she decides not to go along with it, running off on her own to her house. She's too messed up now, believing that the sheriff was right all along. This is actually all her fault, bringing the Ravencroft magic here with her. When she wakes up, she gets confirmation that the host attacked the museum in the middle of the night when everyone was gone. Thelma privately texts her that she heard from Fred, and the new information doesn't change anything about how she feels. But Thorn disagrees about herself, feeling that her success in banishing Ben, now knowing he's her uncle, means her magic was never pure. She was the same as him and is destroying another innocent town. Her father gently walks in with relief to see she made it home, and she opens up about how she's feeling. He tells her the truth, that her mother and Ben were not close and had different opinions on using magic, not associating with him being something she chose before Thorn was born, and all her father knew is that he was told their relationship couldn't be salvaged. Thorn is understandably upset that this was kept from her, and he says he knows, all of his guilt about what he did back home flowing out, that her mother would have hated it, but she just shouts out that her mom's not here and that he can't make decisions about her entire life based on what her mom said 16 years ago. She starts to cry as he leaves the room to get something, and he returns to say her mom, Jenny, was the epitome of what the Ravencroft family should have stood for. People who cared deeply for each other and the earth, handing her a wooden box. In it, she finds pressed flowers, baby food jars turned into herb containers, and a hand-bound journal. He leaves her alone, and she looks through and finds a jar that says it's a protection spell for Sweet Sally, or one that says happiness hopes for my daughter, love-strengthening spell for Simon, healing spell for Ben. Good things, not things like she associated with her uncle. The journal tells of Ben calling again, excited to be an uncle, but not knowing how to tell him he won't be allowed contact. This is where I do have a little bit of an issue with the continuity with the movie, because he clearly would have said something about Thorn being his niece in the movie if it was that important to him, but we have to just play along with expanding continuity that was not there before. Ben had been showing Ginny proof of their ancestor Sarah's terrible actions that were exciting him, and you can feel the pain of her love for her brother, but not being able to see him in himself anymore. As she reads about Wicca from her mother, she realizes that she forgot everything good about it from before the disaster, and that she doesn't have to fear what's inside her if her intentions are good, now taking in that her mother is also part of her. And this is enough for her to decide to go to the corn farm alone, the only place on the list that the host hasn't hit yet. Not finding any guards there, she repeats the words from her mother's journal that are supposed to heal and protect the harvest and soil, but the green mist starts to come out instead. She can't see the host though, hoping she still has a chance to continue. She repeats the spell as she digs her hands deep into the ground, but the fog only thickens, and the voice rings from above. She refuses to give up and let the plants die, but it gets so hard to breathe that she has no choice but to start running, realizing that her own time is running out if she doesn't escape while it starts killing everything around her. As it descends upon her, she thinks of Jordan's death and imagines what hers will look like until she suddenly hears Velma's voice call out. An arrow hits the host in the eye, and it doesn't fall. Flickering and fading without recovery, the eye and part of the mouth almost fully gone. Velma rushes over and saves Thorn, carrying her out as Fred shouts directions, and the others join them, Daphne holding a scythe. With her clearing the way, and something big and black in Scooby's mouth, the host seems to have stopped saying anything beyond making noise as it follows them. Shaggy saying he thinks they know they caught one, which Velma agrees with. Fred comes out just behind them, armed with a crossbow, explaining he's on the school archery team as best he can as they continue. Fred directs everyone into a grain silo to hide, and when Thorn realizes the others could see her holding Velma's hand here and tries to take it away, Velma just holds it tighter. Scooby drops what was in his mouth, and Thorn finds it to be a Green Grove drone, that company pitching itself at the nursery before, with a light flashing to reveal the host's missing eye and broken smile projecting onto the wall. Velma explains that the company attached the lights to their watering drones, and used it and the mist to create the host illusion, one likely having a speaker for the voice, meaning that it was fake and a lawn care company was killing healthy plants. Velma points out that the startup had been pitching itself to businesses all around town, wanting to corner the market, and having a bid for a citywide contract. But without enough research, they didn't realize their new pesticide interacts with a previously harmless fungus common in this area that creates a toxin, killing the plants instead. All of Velma's experiments she's been doing have been leading to this directly, only just getting the results today, and was going to explain it all at school when Thorn didn't show up. Furthermore, she began suspecting this after the second visit of the host, the healthy soil sample treated with their pesticide being identical to the samples collected from the attack. Every location hit was also treated with the pesticide 2 weeks before they rotted. That's why the host would sometimes visit without anyone even there. It had to work on a predetermined schedule, and thanks to Scooby, they now have evidence. As thankful as she is, Thorn isn't really sure what she has to do with a company she had never heard of before moving here, and Daphne explains the company needed someone to take the fall. This would have ruined the citywide contract and bankrupted them. Fred picks up where she leaves off, saying that that's where Thorn comes in. They probably saw the article about the new spooky band in town, and decided to take advantage of it to frame her. So with all of the tabloid coverage of the disaster back home, it was easy to uncover her past and build a narrative. So she realizes, if it could all be dismissed as vandalism by the scary new goth girl, they would have gotten away with it, and it probably would have worked too if not for the gang. She also explains that she was here to do healing magic, but it failed. The mist starts infecting the silo, and the door is stuck. Or, as Daphne realizes, it's locked. Probably by whoever was controlling the drones outside. None of their attempts to escape work as it continues to rise around them. Thorn dropping dropping to the ground to grasp seeds and try to repeat her healing spell over and over. She can almost feel it, a primal sense inside her, until it slips away and her healing decays again. When there's suddenly a burst of light and the door has opened, they all rush out and get some air, and when Thorn's eyes finally adjust, she sees Dusk. Luna as well, helping Scooby. Dusk saying they were worried when she never came to school and used the Friend Finder app. Thorn takes this opportunity to apologize for everything that's happened, though Dusk admits she wasn't entirely wrong and overwhelmed. They all were, and she wishes she could take back what she did. She just missed having someone to talk to. They agree they are all soul sisters and love each other, the two hugging while Luna smiles as she helps Daphne and Scooby. As it seems like a happy ending, Thorn fantasizes about kissing Velma as she walks over to her, opening her mouth only to cough and try to say she needs to say something important before she collapses in her arms. Later, Thorn wishes she were at the hospital with Velma, but instead has to be on stage at City Hall in a dress Green Grove has given her to wear, where she and the rest of the band are applauded by the CEO of the company for exposing bad actors who orchestrated the host scam and doing the town and company a service. None of them wanted to do this, but Jordan's death was ruled an accident, so this is the only way for the company to be held publicly accountable. They had given the cops their statement, the drowned drone and soil samples, but they couldn't answer everything without admitting they had broken into the school before, so she also wonders if the perpetrators had followed them there, why they wouldn't have stolen the experiment that could implicate them, or at least sabotage it. Answering those kinds of questions would require Velma, who still hasn't woken up. Thorn also feels bad that she and the rest of the gang aren't on the stage, because the town refuses to reward them. The CEO then reveals he's giving the girls the first ever sustainability scholarship, officially trying to buy them off just like they bought off the rest of the town to get away with it. She wishes they really had gone bankrupt, but it seems they have resources enough to make up for what they did financially, which means they never even needed the host anyway, and she overhears that they are still getting the citywide contract. Thorn is furious enough to follow the CEO out to his car, confronting him about how none of this means anything to him. He tries to butter her up by saying they called the money a scholarship, but the funds aren't locked to educational spending, so she can do whatever she wants and he won't tell anyone. She confronts him about what's to stop him from doing it again, and he clearly realizes the girl on stage before was an act, but ultimately nothing she can say would make a difference, so she leaves him. Thorn walks through an odd cold breeze as a woman with an ascot walks past her and gets in the car with the CEO, while he yells that he told her to get out. Loud and cold, she grabs his arm and tells him to leave here, while he tries to protest and say to stop it. The car suddenly accelerates right toward Thorn as it crashes, blood flowing from the CEO's hanging arm, the only part of him left visible. Where the woman had been holding him, there's a smear of bright gold dust, and the passenger seat where she sat is empty, somehow now standing outside the car untouched. Thorn tries to ask how the woman got out, truly already knowing, while the woman looks at her with eyes that are golden, telling her that she's ruining the town too as she starts walking toward her. Approaching the car, she walks through it, but before Thorn can scream, someone else does as the crowd collects. She tries to warn them about the woman, but when she looks back, she's gone. Thorn once again finds herself interrogated by Fred's dad, not mentioning the woman as she says the car had been malfunctioning, so maybe it's one of those self-driving cars that messed up, which he seems to buy and says he's sorry she had to see it. She has the gang pick her up, with Dusk and Luna, stopping at an empty dog park. They all ask for details, having only heard about a crash, so she tells them everything, including telling the sheriff it was an accident, but that the CEO actually drove himself into the wall and wasn't alone. Scooby whimpers as she describes the woman with the ascot, and despite it being pretty unbelievable, they don't doubt her. Daphne immediately points out that no one wears ascots but Fred, and Luna latches onto the woman saying she was ruining her town. Fred brings up the rest of what the woman looks like, saying as a whole it's not as rare as his ascot, but together sounds like a pioneer outfit, and he believes the ghost is Laura Coolidge. He says Velma was already looking into her as a possibility if the Green Grove theory didn't work, but she sat it aside when it was clear that was true. Dusk asks why she would be haunting here since she's one of the founders and should love it, not be harming people, and it hits Thorn that the woman she saw did look exactly like the portrait of Laura at the library, eyes glowing gold, like the handprint left on the CEO's lifeless arm. It's then that it hits her, the gold residue on the arm, like when they saw Jordan's body and her hand was covered in gold, not paint after all. Fred confirms it fits Velma's theory, that Laura wasn't trying to hurt the town, instead believing she was protecting it. Thorn confesses that when she first arrived at school, a boy split his bag on the base of a statue of Laura, and when she got angry and tried to confront him, the statue toppled over and left a weird metallic fog that left behind a smear of gold dust, which she hadn't mentioned before because she was afraid her magic caused it. Dusk assures her she's never hurt anyone with her magic though, even accidentally. Daphne adds that if Laura thought the boy was vandalizing her monument, she might have tried to stop him, and the damage from Green Grove made her more powerful and vindictive or something. Thorn then brings up that Velma wanted to borrow the book on Coolsville and Crystal Cove, having questions about Laura's wagon train and the tragedies on the journey, so they decide they need to go visit her at the hospital and see what research she might have. The nurse greets them and is pleased to recognize Thorn by her hair from Velma's description, who has actually been awake now. As Thorn starts walking to the room, she recognizes the gold dust on the sleeve, and Jordan's hand is also the same she saw when the light broke off in rehearsals. She also remembers this wasn't the first time she saw someone besides Fred wearing an ascot, having thought she saw him in the hall when they broke into the school and felt that cold during the flickering lights, not unlike the car that drove into the wall, which means it was Laura who messed with the stage light to try and hit her, who told her to leave in the hall, and killed Jordan and the CEO because they harmed the reputation of the town in her eyes. Velma isn't in her room when they get there, though, the TV covering the crash with books all over the bed and a journal open in the middle. Glancing at the notes and journal, it's clear she came to the same conclusions and had been suspecting Laura since before Thorn even got here. Fred confirming Velma isn't here, Thorn says Velma knew Laura wouldn't stop just because she was proven innocent, and reads a passage from Velma's journal that says she believes Laura's train was full of so much tragedy because she herself was eliminating anyone or anything she felt threatened her future. Daphne then cautiously asks her to look at something, which Thorn confirms she already saw. Gold dust on the floor under the bed, on the edge of the sheets, on the page of the book near the pillow. And she believes Velma went willingly. She moves the books to show the map they were holding open, a new marking that reads she's drawn to what belonged to her. Nearly every important building in town is crossed out, except for the museum, which is labeled the Coolidge exhibit. Thorn believes this is where they will find her and has a plan. She just has to stop by her place first and get properly dressed. They enter the museum thanks to Daphne's lockpicking skills. Thorn here to defeat yet another undead witch. She takes out a can of spray paint and starts to vandalize the area to draw the ghost out. Here because Velma believes Laura could only manifest from items she had owned. And with so many memorials in the important buildings around town, it gave her a lot of opportunities. But no place beyond the museum has this many. She starts calling Laura out directly, Laura appearing with a screech and terrifying golden face. Thorn runs and gives her cue, the others preparing their own spray paint cans so they can defile the biggest collection of Laura's artifacts. The ghost calls them meddling kids and chases Shaggy, the gang leading her in circles while laughing. Thorn then asks Scooby to take her to the Hex Girls, and they rush to the Blake wing where Dusk greets the talking dog with Luna from their hiding spot. They walk into the Coolidge exhibit, decorated more like Levi and Laura's home, and Thorn realizes Velma circled this because it's what binds Laura to the town, her energy being all over the room, the same way that Sarah Ravencroft was bound to her book. And sat at one of the tables is Velma. She's covered in more gold dust than any of the prior victims, sat in a perfect pose with her eyes closed like a statue. Thorn has her soul sisters begin performing the plan as she walks toward Velma, touching her hands as the closed eyes spark open, and she smiles, but she can't seem to move her body, just like the CEO, prevented by the dust. Velma explains that she called the ghost to her with a piece of rubble from the statue, and convinced her she believed in her mission, leading her into a trap she knew everyone would figure out. Scooby keeping a safeguard on Velma, the others start running into the room, and Thorn pulls her mother's journal out as Laura enters. Thorn tells the ghost they aren't so different. All she's wanted to do was fit in here quietly, but didn't realize how many people would be hurt when trying to pretend life is perfect. And Laura made her realize running from her dark past means she'll never be able to enjoy the light. She checks her friends and gives her cue, a light suddenly filling the room. Laura upset as she realizes the two of them are in the middle of a Wiccan pentagram drawn in chalk on the floor of what's meant to be her home. Thorn's friends at each point with a lit candle in front of them. She recites the revised version of the banishment spell, but Laura knocks the journal from her hands and clasps her hands around her wrists. But thankfully, she doesn't need it. As Luna shakes soil from a jar along the chalk, Shaggy fills a chalice with water, Fred lights a match and drops it in a bowl of paper scraps. Daphne lights a bundle of incense, all while Thorn continues her spell. She tells the ghost this is no longer her town to protect. It's hers. Dusk saying hers too, joined by every one of her friends. As the ghost shrieks, Thorn admits she created a beautiful town, but they can't live in the past forever and have to move on, and so does she. Finally, the ghost releases her, disintegrating into a bright golden flash that Scooby starts to bark at. Only a single gold nugget left. Thorn puts it somewhere safe to make sure Laura will be bound tight enough to not escape, and Velma rushes over and presses against her. And then, the two kiss in front of everyone. No hiding. They look around and see no shock, only the happy and tired faces of their friends. 6 weeks later, it's the night of the rescheduled talent show, and Velma is wearing red in the audience to match Thorn, now officially girlfriends. The band are prepared for their big performance, which Dusk reports to be completely sold out. The proceeds for the show are being put toward rehabilitating the soil and planting new crops to replace the ones that were killed, the band donating their entire check to the cause. As they walk out, Thorn gives several looks to Velma, and even smiles at her dad, sitting next to her. They perform an updated version of Earth, Water, Fire, and Air, changing wind to water, which most people realize is kind of redundant with air also being mentioned, and give an amazing performance. Winning the show doesn't even matter. Getting to be here with all of her friends is win enough. She brings out her throat potion and checks her phone, which has several missed messages from just before the show. The gang mentioning a suit of armor going missing from the museum last night that seems to have walked out by itself, according to them. She drops her phone back and returns to her friends, leaving the gang to solve the case themselves, and no longer hiding from her past, bloodline, or even her name, and also ready to help if the gang ever needs her. And that's the Hex Girls, a Rogue Thorn. This is definitely an interesting entry for the franchise, sort of meeting the kind of expectations for what I would want from the series that I expressed in the prior video, like Mystery Incorporated but even more mature, and this very clearly takes a lot of heavy inspiration from that particular series. Going in, I knew it was a young adult novel, obviously, and the titles that I've read in recent times are definitely a little more mature than some people consider that age range, or however you see it, but it was still more mature than I was actually expecting because it is an officially licensed Scooby-Doo title. It's one thing for fanfiction to be more mature, which arguably this still is. It's officially sanctioned fanfiction in a way, but it's still surprising when the franchise is allowed to be so under approved terms because it's so rare. Jordan dying the way she did was really kind of graphic and shocking, and part of me was expecting that it would be revealed that she was fine and it would still get some kind of cleaner ending to that. And even the CEO being killed and the way it's described with all the blood and everything is fairly shocking. We've also come a long way from Mystery Incorporated's representation that was groundbreaking when the show ended in 2013, despite not being able to more openly say something about Velma's lesbian relationship at the end of the series that was written intentionally. Now also having had her flirtation with Coco in Trick or Treat that was far more obvious and in your face, but still not going as far as a kiss. Thorn and Velma here are practically lusting after each other. Thorn is thinking a lot of very intense thoughts about how she wants to hold her and kiss her eventual girlfriend, about her shampoo. And it's surprising that not only is Velma allowed to be shown as queer, which is just being more and more accepted in the franchise now, but to also allow Thorn to openly be a gay figure herself and end up with Velma so explicitly. And like I said in the opening of the video, that really feels like it was a long time coming itself, because the Hex Girls were partially created by a gay man and have such a hugely gay following. So as upset as it might make a certain group of people, it really feels like a natural evolution, even if it never leaves this book. I know the author has also talked about trying to balance the level of fan service in the book, and I do hope I was able to at least pick up on a good amount of the little Easter eggs thrown in, which I do appreciate. I'm about to say the negative stuff, but I don't hate this book. I actually really like this book. Don't take any of this personally, and don't let it scare you away from the book, okay? Okay? So, I don't necessarily think the book is perfect, as I do struggle a bit with continuity and characterization. Thorn, first of all, feels wildly out of character, and unlike how she appears in past iterations, honestly, I sometimes struggled with remembering that she was supposed to be the same character because I was having a harder time believing she would be in the situations here. At the same time, this is clearly a reimagining in a lot of ways, bending the continuity so that the gang are still in high school despite being adults in the movie where they met her, and adding continuity that Ben was her uncle when that clearly would have been touched on in the movie if it were ever intended to be applied. And on top of that, you're also taking her from being a very memorable supporting character that never had focus, and making her the point of view character of a decently sized story here with mature situations that the character would have never been put in before. So I do understand the need to let the character evolve into something new when evolving her into a more richly developed leading lady. I think Luna survives the best out of our lead trio, if you could consider them that, since the other two really don't have as big of a role. I didn't feel that she was all that out of character or doing anything that took me out of the story. Dusk, however, was kind of annoying in how she was used. I hate the horrible, stupid trope of friends falling apart that is used to give conflict between the two of them. I genuinely don't believe those characters, even in this continuity, would end up in such a broken situation, no matter how realistic it might be. And it's just generally annoying to see miscommunication, or lack of communication, or rifts in friendship that don't make sense, being used as important plot devices. I really didn't like that. I was kind of annoyed throughout that whole part. I just don't think this trio would ever have interpersonal drama like that. It feels very much young adult trope that had to be here by default, instead of justified in the narrative. I'm sure there are other people who won't have as much issue with that, but that's a me problem. Another thing I had issue with throughout a lot of the book is that Scooby and the gang don't really have much presence for a lot of it. I know the book is obviously themed around the Hex Girls, the gang being small on the cover to communicate this isn't their story, so I went in knowing that, but I was still left disappointed with how unimportant they were in a lot of it. Obviously they do pick up in how important they are and the amount of things they do, and I did feel a lot more satisfied by the end with how they were explored when considering they are supporting cast here. But I did remain disappointed with how Scooby was used. He never really feels like Scooby Scooby. He just feels like the dog that's there in the background, maybe once or twice saying something, but otherwise is irrelevant outside of one or two small moments. And when you're reading a potential series themed around Scooby and friends, I kind of wanted to see Scooby with the friends. I did feel like that took away from it for me personally, but also I'm literally a Scooby-Doo channel, so I do carry heavy bias around his inclusion, while others may love getting to spend the majority of the book with Thorn and be satisfied. I do think it makes sense that her mother was Wiccan and that she had that in her bloodline. I think exploring that continuity inclusion makes sense. I just don't know that I love the reveal that Ben was her uncle. As I've said, it's just such a big reveal that it's hard to believe it wouldn't have been brought up in the movie, and makes it harder to accept for me personally. And not to harp on it, but it really is always disappointing that we have to retcon that they were adults in those specific movies so clearly and have them just be high schoolers again. I also question making Fred's dad, Fred Jones Sr. again, obviously a Mystery Incorporated continuity reference with the inclusion of Crystal Cove, but having him be the sheriff instead of the mayor. I feel like that series showed he could get away with whatever he wanted as the mayor and always being in the crime scenes questioning his son just fine, but I do suppose that you could argue it being more realistic for him to be there if he actually is the sheriff and directly has his hands on that at all times. It's just a little confusing when you have shared but altered continuity. Again, I'm the absolute extreme when it comes to picking apart a Scooby title and exact continuity. Not everyone's going to be as overzealous about it as I am and won't care about those little details. One thing that just really doesn't bother me that I know will make that same group of people upset is of course switching races of characters, like all of the band and arguably Velma. But it gets to a point, you're literally reading a book. What you see is gonna be in your head anyway. If it's so upsetting that you can't engage with the book because the characters aren't all white, maybe you shouldn't be indulging in young adult fiction anyway. If books aimed at 12 and up are too mature for you, nothing in this book changed for me when it comes to these characters being white, black, or any other representation you find here. I did overall like a lot of aspects of the mystery. It does feel mostly like one that belongs in the Scooby world for the modern day. Green Grove using drones to create the host, but strategically showing up to make it look like this thing is causing what their pesticide was going to actually do anyway is a decent twist that was set up early on, and I think it only makes sense to still have a real ghost show up here given the supernatural nature of the original movie. And it was clear that something like that was being set up immediately with the statue. If anything, that felt more satisfying and like Scooby than the drones. A lot of the book, I did feel like I was sort of watching Mystery Incorporated in the tone and feelings explored. And after just expressing that that's exactly what I'm looking for in Scooby, I feel like this satisfied a decent itch for me, for everything that it is. I do also think Thorn and Velma's romance feels fairly natural. It's not terribly forced, though Velma's fear of coming out does feel a little unnatural to her. I think that's kind of there for it to feel triumphant when they do embrace at the end, but it feels more artificial that way. Velma as the most developed otherwise feels fine though, and Fred and Daphne feel likable enough with their little moments. As of the current time, we don't know if the Scooby and Friends young adult series is ongoing as far as the publisher is concerned. Certainly buying and supporting this book would help tell them that you want to see more if you do. For me, I do think it would be interesting and fun to see ongoing young adult novels with the gang. I think this book sort of writes itself into a corner with Coolsville though. As much as the ending is open for a new mystery occurring, I'm not as optimistic that them exclusively being stuck here and unable to leave allows for more stories that would be as interesting without really falling too much into Mystery Incorporated. And we've already explored the interesting lore of the town as far as continuity. And I also question what other friends of Scooby could convincingly take the spotlight without it being more direct sequel Hex Girls connected stories, which I also don't know if that itself could sustain a sequel or many, and how sustainable a series that doesn't feature the gang as the leads could even be. It doesn't seem like this first book was the big hit it was hoped to be, even with the Hex Girls front and center, and I do wonder how much of it is that the gang aren't right there with them, that the Scooby name isn't even in the title and might not catch the eye, or search results. Overall, this book was quite easy to read and get through. I think it's definitely worth checking out if you love Scooby and want a more mature story without it being too adult, or especially if you love the Hex Girls. I do recommend adjusted expectations somewhat if you really want Scooby specifically, of course, but I do also believe your mileage may vary depending on how enjoyable you find young adult fiction. The book is pretty much always going to be under $20, and it's pretty good quality with some nice jacket art. I think if you're interested, you should definitely be picking this up and giving it a shot. Definitely go support the author Lily Meade. She personally needed this to be more successful than it turned out, so checking out her other published work and supporting her if you enjoy this one would also be pretty great. Go follow her, go buy this book, buy her other book, go support her, all that. A huge amount of Scooby influencers were sent this book for free, but I am not popular or likable enough and say too many negative things about the overlords, so I did have to personally spend my own money made from this YouTube channel on buying the book to be able to read it and make this video. This is definitely very different from the majority of videos on this channel. We're sort of in booktube territory as a crossover, but hopefully it was a decent and interesting change for the sake of Scooptober instead of more of the same. This is already quite a long video. Can you tell I'm losing my voice? Oh my god. So I won't take up more of your time. I think that's a wrap for today. The Patreon is now public if you want to go support the channel directly there. Sometimes you might get exclusive content. I do have plans eventually, but more than anything, it's just to directly support future videos and things like that if you choose to do so. Bye!
You feel the cloud your